So Julian Assange, who has been under arbitrary detention in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for going on, I think, 7 years now. I think it's almost 7 years, or just over 8, for essentially telling the truth about American war crimes. Remember, WikiLeaks were the people who released the files that showed, from the leak from Chelsea Manning, and released the files of that gunship shooting down the Reuters journalists. That's why they want him. They want him for that. Ever since he released that and released how badly America were committing these war crimes, they've been after him. And he's been in the embassy for 7 years almost, I think. In March, his communications were cut off. Now, I find the timing of his communications being cut off in March really interesting, because they said it was because he was outspoken with regards to the goings-on in Catalonia, in Spain, and that's the reason why they cut off his communications. But remember, this was all during the same time as the whole Skripal affair was falling down around the UK's ears, and just before the trilateral bombing of Syria and everything else that has gone on in between, the silencing of voices, the silencing of independent voices on social media, yada, yada, yada. I don't need to go into it. You can see where I'm going here. The silencing of Assange, the timing of it is really curious. So when I see this, Julian Assange's communications partly restored by Ecuadorian government, literally an hour and a half ago, I got goosebumps. I was giddy. I really was. For any of you who are let me just try and imagine, okay? Put yourself in his shoes. He has been in solitary confinement for 7 months. That is torture. It's torture. Prison guards say that when they walk down the isolation ward in prisons, they can hear people wailing because of the torture they're going through. The only contact he's got is with his lawyer. And obviously on a weekend, that's it. The whole weekend, nothing. No communication with the outside world, no phones, no internet, nothing. Nothing whatsoever. And finally, something has happened. So this is from the Belfast Telegraph. The first newspaper to report on this today was the Daily Mail, and I had that set up, but I took it out as soon as other newspapers started reporting on it. So this is what the story is so far. The Ecuadorian government has decided to partly restore communications for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. They were cut in March, denying him access to the internet or phones and limiting visitors to members of his legal team. He has been living inside Ecuador's embassy in London for over 6 years. The Ecuadorian government said in March it had acted because Mr. Assange had breached a written commitment made to the government at the end of 2017 not to issue messages that it might interfere with other states. WikiLeaks said in a statement, quote, Ecuador has told WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange that it will remove the isolation regime imposed on him following meetings between 2 senior UN officials and Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno on Friday. This is from Christine Ranson. I can never pronounce her name. She said this: it is positive that through UN intervention, Ecuador has partly ended the isolation of Mr. Assange although it is of grave concern that his freedom to express his opinions is still limited. The UN has already declared Mr. Assange a victim of arbitrary detention. This unacceptable situation must end. The UK government must abide by the UN's ruling and guarantee that he can leave the Ecuadorian embassy without the threat of extradition to the United States. Hear, hear. Mr. Assange has been granted political asylum by Ecuador, but believes he will be arrested if he leaves the embassy and extradited to the United States for questioning over the activities of WikiLeaks. Remember, WikiLeaks is a journalistic operation. It's an assault on journalism. WikiLeaks said Mr. Assange has not entered into any form of agreement with Ecuador to restrict his speech or other rights. I always found it interesting. I always thought there's no way Julian Assange would agree to that. His lawyers are considering his legal options and will make a statement in due course. The WikiLeaks statement said that the meetings were held in Ecuador between the President of the UN High Commissioner and refugees Filippo Grandi and UN Special Rapporteur for the Freedom of Expression David Kaye. It said concern over Assange's situation has been raised by other UN bodies as well as Human Rights Watch, who was refused access to him, Amnesty International, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, Ecuador's Permanent Human Rights Commission, and public protests. Quote, Mr. Assange was informed of Ecuador's decision hours after Mr. Grandi and Mr. Kaye met with President Moreno. President Moreno ordered Mr. Assange's isolation on March 28th in retaliation for giving, quote, opinions on the politics of friendly nations like Spain or the United States. The statement continued, quote, Mr. Assange had critically reported on the Trump administration's involvement in Yemen and Spanish brutality. High-level representations were made by the Trump administration and the Spanish government over Mr. Assange, which was given political refugee status by Ecuador in 2012 over US attempts to prosecute him. The Trump administration stepped up efforts to prosecute Mr. Assange after WikiLeaks published the largest leak in the history of the CIA last year. The US has announced that it now considers Ecuador a strategic ally and helped it secure $1 billion in previously withheld loans. Sounds like they got the loans and then did it anyway. That's what it sounds like. For almost 7 months, Ecuador has kept Mr. Assange in a regime that has been likened to solitary confinement by Human Rights Watch. See, it's not just me who says it's solitary confinement. Ecuador has prevented Mr. Assange from receiving visitors other than his lawyers. It installed 3 sets of signal jammers in the embassy to prevent Mr. Assange from communicating using mobile phones or internet. The extrajudicial 7-month isolation of Mr. Assange has interfered with his fundamental rights and the other rights of his family. It has also prevented Mr. Assange from working and giving public talks. Ecuador has also prevented all journalists from speaking to him during this time. Ecuador's president until last year, Rafael Correa, has denounced Mr. Assange's treatment as torture, which is what I call it, stating the government is basically attacking Julian's mental health. Ecuador has informed Mr. Assange that the government intends to continue Moreno's policy of restricting him from expressing his opinions under threat of expulsion. Now, this comes after, obviously, the meeting with the UN officials, as it says in this article. It also comes after, on Friday, Ecuador gets UN praise for freedom of expression, as Assange was still gagged in the embassy, which was kind of hilarious, to be quite honest. And then there was this article in Sputnik as well, which highlighted how Julian Assange's lawyers were going to, whether they still are, were going to sue Ecuador and its Ecuadorian foreign minister, which is, this all happened on, I think, last week. And I'll leave a link down to the article when I actually cut this and put it out as a video. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is the best news I have seen for a long, long time. This is huge. We have desperately been in need in the last 7 months, more than any time I can remember over the last few years, certainly since I've been interested in politics. We have desperately needed his voice more than any time now. And the fact that he's going to partly get his communications back is a good thing. Now, how much of his communications he's going to get back, we haven't got those details yet. I'm sure that when the statement comes out from his lawyers, we'll find out, and it wouldn't be surprised if come tomorrow we're actually getting tweets from Julian Assange's account that are actually being written by Julian Assange. But this is brilliant news. I cannot stress this enough. He's a goddamn journalist. He's a journalist. Perhaps the best journalist in the world, because he has provided a platform for whistleblowers who want to blow the whistle on criminal activity from governments, from Western governments and other governments around the world, want to blow the whistle on criminal activity of their own government. He provides an avenue for them to leak documents to him without the fear of them ever being found out. That is journalism 101. He obviously has to check that everything is perfect and above board from the leaks that he gets, which I can only imagine is an absolute monumental task, especially when every week they must get information from people which is false, just trying to catch them out, which makes it even more amazing to me that everything they've published is true. Everything. Can you say the same thing about any outlet? Any outlet? CNN, BBC, Fox, MSNBC. Can you say any of them? God, you just reel down the list of the corporate news. Can you say that they have never published anything that's false? No. But you can with Julian Assange, and you can with WikiLeaks. And this is why it's so important at this time when we are, let's face it, so close right now to global annihilation. It's so important that we have his voice at this time. Well done, the UN. It's not very often I say that, but it certainly seems like this meeting, which I thought wasn't going to have any sort of influence at all, it certainly seems like they have managed to strike some sort of a deal. And I, for one, am happy with it. And I want to give a special shout out here to the people who have made that picture. You can see there, #Unity4J. The people, #Unity4J, especially Elizabeth Lee Voss and Susie Dawson, have been relentless in exposing this, relentless in shining the spotlight on his mistreatment. And I just want to say a big thank you to those two people and everybody in the Unity4J movement who have not given up, and if anything got more and more, dug their heels in more and more and done more and more work, and it looks like it's going to pay off. So we shall see. I won't believe it until it happens, until I start seeing him tweeting and start seeing him on television again and making, and giving interviews. But this is great news, and I, for one, am absolutely over the moon with it, and I'm sure you are too. If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and click the bell below so you get a notification of when I drop further videos. Independent voices like mine, I'm sure you're aware by now, are being censored across all social media platforms, so please like and comment on the videos. That really does help the channel out, and share the videos wherever you can to grow the audience. If you can, please support me on Patreon. You can do it for as little as $1 a month. I cannot do this without your help. I rely on your donations. Thanks very much for your support. It really is appreciated. Until next time, peace and take care.